Hi, I'm Jennifer, the Inquiring Quilter, and welcome to another episode of Intelligent Quilting. Today's topic, the humble half-square triangle. Yes, this unit is probably one of the most popular in quilting today, for pieced quilts, that is. And getting to know how to make this unit accurately and quickly is a great thing to have in your quilter's toolbox. Now, the intelligent quilting approach to half-square triangles is to choose the method for making half-square triangles that best fits the type of quilt you're trying to make, or that best suits the pattern that you're following. So let's talk about the many different ways in which you can create half-square triangles. Probably one of the most frequently used and the most popular is the 2 at a time method. That results in 2 identical half-square triangles. The fabrics are the same, and you make them 2 at a time. You'll most often use this method when you're trying to use up your scraps and you're following or trying to create a scrappy quilt. For example, this one back here. I would pair up a square of purple with a square of green and sew them together and create 2 half-square triangles that were purple and green using the same 2 fabrics. And then I repeated that process over and over again till I had enough half-square triangles, and I laid them out in a pattern that I liked and created this quilt. You could do that too to use up your scraps. The reason half-square triangles 2 at a time is used a lot in patterns is because it results in a half-square triangle that's very stable. What I mean by that is this edge and this edge are along the straight of grain, so it doesn't skew or stretch out of shape as you're pressing it. So you'll find that a lot of patterns use this method to create half-square triangles. By the way, the how to do half-square triangles videos will be coming on my YouTube channel soon, so watch for them. You can make half-square triangles 2 at a time. You can also make them 4 at a time. Now, this particular method, let me show you an example of when you might want to use 4 at a time. A maple leaf block like this one has 4 half-square triangles. And so if you're making a maple leaf quilt, you might want to use that particular method. The downside to using that particular method is that it results in half-square triangles that have bias along the edge, which means they can easily stretch out of shape. So you have to be kind of careful, well, more than kind of careful, when you're pressing them so that you don't skew or stretch them. But it is a quick method, and I'll, again, be showing that later on my YouTube channel. Another method that you might employ for making half-square triangles is the 8 at a time method. That's great when you're creating a quilt that has sawtooth stars in them, like this one back here. Because if you look, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 half-square triangles in each block. The method that you use for 8 at a time half-square triangles is remarkably similar to the 2 at a time half-square triangle method, so therefore it results in a nice stable half-square triangle. Again, no stretchiness along the edges. What other methods might you use to create half-square triangles? Well, one of the ones I like to use is AccuQuilt. With an AccuQuilt die like this and an AccuQuilt cutter, I can cut my triangles perfectly. And then when I have 2 triangles, these happen to be the same fabric, but when I have 2 triangles like this, I pair them up, I sew them together, and I get 1 half-square triangle at a time. Now that may seem like a whole lot of sewing to you and a whole lot of energy to put into making half-square triangles. The benefit is, with the other methods that I've talked about so far, the 2 at a time, the 4 at a time, and the 8 at a time, you typically have to trim them up to the exact size you need after sewing them and pressing them. The AccuQuilt method uses triangles that have little notches. And so it's easy to line the two separate pieces up and to sew them together. And then when you press them open, the half square triangle is already the correct size, so you don't have to do any trimming. So although it may seem like initially a little bit extra work, you're not going to have to trim. And, you know, who can beat having a die cut your fabric for you instead of having to rotary cut? So that's why I like the AccuQuilt method. What other methods might you use? Well, you've probably heard of the paper method, or triangles on paper. This is from Thangles, and with this kind, it's kind of like foundation piecing a little bit. With this kind of a method, you'll have a rectangle like this, or perhaps a square, but it'll be marked with lines that tell you where to sew. So following the manufacturer's directions, in this particular case, I would cut a strip of fabric, lay this on top, sew along the lines, and then cut them at the solid line, cut them apart. And then I press them open, remove the papers, and I end up with two perfectly sized half square triangles here, two here, two here. So for this particular one, I'd end up with 6. That would be exactly the same, and they would be perfectly sized. So using triangle paper is another excellent method that you should put in your toolbox for making half square triangles. And finally, the last method is it's similar to this. It's called the strip method, and unlike this one where you're using paper, with the strip method, you're cutting a strip and then you're using the 45-degree angle on your ruler to cut out triangles. So it's basically the AccuQuilt method, except if you can't afford to buy a die and a die cutter, you can use a strip of fabric and the rulers that you already have to end up cutting triangles like this. And then you put them together and you sew them, and you end up with, again, fairly accurate, already sized half square triangles. So those are the methods that I wanted to talk about today. And again, look for how-to videos for half square triangles coming up on my YouTube channel soon. Until then, be sure to click that follow button so that you're notified whenever I upload a new video. And I'll see ya